and if you ever get to chapter 5, and I don't advise that you start at chapter 1 and read, because it's not very readable. But if you do look at chapter 5, then that, in a sense, is the bigger picture of what the Common European Framework is trying to say. I'm sorry about losing my voice just now. Because the chapter 5 describes, yes, it describes the communicative language competences, which are put into the different levels of the framework. But before it gets to the communicative language competences, it also has a description of the competences which we all use, more or less consciously, when we're speaking another language or communicating in another language. Of course, we need linguistic competences and communicative competences of a socio-linguistic kind, but we introduce into, without perhaps being so conscious of it, and perhaps without having consciously been taught, we do introduce into, we do draw upon general competences. Let me give you an example. And it's only part of the general competences. It would take too long to go through all of it, and it wouldn't be very interesting to just go through it all. But it does describe everything that we bring to a situation, our knowledge of the world, if you like, which we bring to a situation. Some of it is probably universal, and so, but perhaps not an awful lot. For example, before I move on to this, just to be more precise, some of the things that we bring to the situation now we know, do we? We usually know that you take turns when you're conversing with somebody. And I think that's probably universal for every language and every language community. But of course, the way in which you take turns varies from one language community to another. And the amount of space, the amount of time between your turn and my turn also varies from one language community to another. In Europe, famously, or perhaps infamously, the Scandinavians, and particularly the Finns, are thought to be very silent. In fact, what happens in Finnish conversation is that the length of time, we're talking microseconds, but it's part of your, it's in your body, as it were. The length of time between you stopping to say something and me starting, continuing the conversation, is longer in microseconds, but enough to be noticeable. And it's longer than, say, between French people. And so what happens if you have a French person, and I've seen this happen in international meetings, even with people who are conscious of this, is that the people from Scandinavia, particularly Finns in general, they don't get a chance in the conversation because they wait too long. They wait their ordinary length of time, and by that time, other people have felt that the time is too long, so they say something. You have to fill the gap. And it's a stereotype, and I don't want to over-stereotype, but there is a stereotype, there's a certain tendency anyway, for Scandinavians to have a longer time between turning than people in Southern Europe. So turn-taking is a kind of general competence, but it becomes specific when you go to each particular language. Now, what I wanted to focus upon here is, among the general competences, is what the Common European Framework calls intercultural awareness. So I highlighted what I think are the key words here for later. So intercultural awareness is knowledge, awareness and understanding of the relation, the similarities and distinctive differences between the world of origin. That's a phrase used to, if you like, to overcome the difficulty of saying country, because sometimes it's country, sometimes it's region. The world of origin, where you come from, and the world of the target community, again, to avoid saying country or whatever, because it's more general than that. So understanding the relation between the world of origin and the world of target community produce an intercultural awareness. That knowledge produces an intercultural awareness which includes an awareness of regional and social diversity in both worlds. So we're not just saying it's the difference between Japan and England, but we're also saying it's the differences within Japan, which I know exist and which also exist within England, of different regional varieties of ways of life, culture if you like. But let's avoid the word culture too much, using the word culture too much. So in addition to objective knowledge, I have some objective knowledge about Japan because I've been coming here for the last 5 years from time to time. But I also need intercultural awareness, which covers an awareness of how each community appears from the perspective of the other. How I see you and you see me, or we see you and you see us, in the plural. Often, unfortunately, in the form of stereotypes. So one has to accept that stereotypes exist, but one also has to go beyond stereotypes in intercultural awareness. And then they go on to intercultural skills, still from the same chapter 5, the ability to bring the culture of origin and the foreign culture, here it says foreign, interestingly, it could have said the culture, the world of the target community, but anyway, here it says foreign culture, to bring them into relation with each other. So awareness is one thing, and skill is something else. You've got to be aware of the relationship between different communities and how they see each other, and you are aware of that, and it's part of what you've acquired through your language teaching and learning, and for some of you being here and for others going to other countries. But there's the skill of using that awareness or that knowledge, if you like, to see how the relationship between two communities, two countries, if you like, but two communities of all kinds, has an impact upon the success or failure of communication. So that's one kind of skill involved. The other is cultural sensitivity and the ability to identify and use the variety of strategies for contact with other cultures, with those from other cultures. The importance of not just knowing things, but being able to interact with people and find things out for yourself. Nobody can tell you everything, and you will never learn everything about another country, however long you continue to learn. But the skill of finding things out for yourself is important, and I'll come back to that. Thirdly, the capacity to fulfill the role of cultural intermediary between one's own culture and the foreign culture, and to deal effectively with intercultural misunderstanding and conflict situations. So it's important that we're not just talking about linguistic competence, we're talking about what it calls cultural intermediary here, and in other places it talks about mediation, which is also a skill, which is not exactly the same as translation and interpretation. It's something more than that. It's the ability to deal effectively with misunderstanding and sometimes with conflict. Conflict, not necessarily violent conflict, but conflict in ideas, different ways of understanding things. So don't misunderstand the word conflict here. Just let me say in passing that some of the things in the Common European Framework were originally written in French, and some parts were originally written in English, because those are the two languages of the Council of Europe. And people work in their own language, and then eventually a full French version is produced, and a full English version is produced. But sometimes if you look very carefully, you can see the effect of translation. The word conflit in French is not as strong, if you like, doesn't bring to mind the notion of conflict in the sense I think it does for most native speakers of English as something being to do with violence. It can simply be two ways of seeing things. So conflict, don't misunderstand conflict.